Welcome to the Flagship Pioneering studio at the 2025 JP Morgan Healthcare Conference. I'm Justine Levin-Allerhand. I'm here today with my colleagues, Andre Andonian, the Chair of Asia Pacific for Flagship Pioneering, and Irene Chong, the Assistant Chief Executive for Innovation Enterprise at ASTAR, the Agency for Science, Technology, and Research. Today's conversation is around pioneering partnership, spurring biotech innovation and in Singapore and beyond. So welcome, it's great to have you. Back in October of 2024, we made a really exciting announcement of a joint commitment between Flagship and ASTAR of up to 100 million Singaporean dollars over the next 5 years to promote research and development activities between ASTAR and Flagship and its portfolio companies, as well as to accelerate talent development in APAC and in Singapore. We're already seeing the early value creation in this partnership. There's a collaboration between Flagship-founded Ring Therapeutics and ASTAR and the Singapore Eye Research Institute. So we're excited to have a fast start in our partnership under this broad collaboration framework. But let's start with you, Irene. Sure. It would be great if you could briefly introduce ASTAR to everyone, for those who aren't familiar with ASTAR, as well as ASTAR within the broader Singaporean ecosystem, and how both ASTAR within that ecosystem has an advantage in emerging therapeutic areas and in the life sciences and the physical sciences more generally.
Thanks so much, Justine. So happy to be here. We're so excited to be part of this partnership with Flagship and delighted to be here with you having this conversation. So I'll start with a bit of an introduction to Singapore. I kind of assume that everybody knows where we are. We're a little island, 5 million people, end of the Malaysian peninsula. I think what's unique about Singapore, and I think sometimes people forget, is that we are very well located. We started our life as a trading hub, entrepreneur trade, so connectivity is incredible. Air, sea, land connectivity to a lot of Southeast Asia. And a nugget of information as well, within 7 hours from Singapore, you can actually access Southeast Asia, which has about 700 million people, China, South Korea, Japan, all the large markets for Asia. So we're really excited to be part of this global community for biotech. And you talk about ASTAR, so we're part of the Ministry of Trade and Industry. And some people find that quite interesting. Why would an organization of 6,000 people, 5,000 scientists, be part of the Ministry of Trade and Industry? Actually, the answer is really simple. When we look at science and technology in Singapore, we view that as tools to engage with industry. And so the Agency for Science, Technology, and Research, ASTAR, essentially is 5,000 really clever people looking for opportunities to co-create new innovation with companies, with startups, with entrepreneurs. So you talked a little bit about what's unique about us, and I can share from my perspective that ASTAR is unique in that we're structured to really deliver multidisciplinary research. We're organized across 17 research institutes, but because we're one large organization, if you have a question that requires you to pull on biology, pull on engineering, pull on semiconductor materials, we actually have all of that within ASTAR. So, for our friends who are looking to create new solutions that solve biotech's biggest problems, I think ASTAR is very, very well situated to have those conversations and do very exciting research with you.
Yeah, thank you. And Andre, as Chair of Asia Pacific for Flagship and someone who is based in Singapore, would love to get your perspective from the outside in, but also from the inside out, of really the value proposition of Singapore more generally, and as well as ASTAR, as we enter into this partnership and have one of our global hubs based in Singapore for Asia Pacific.
Very happy to answer this question, and I go even one step back, and I have to take one sip here. So first of all, why are we in Asia? I think, as I would say, as Flagship. And first of all, Asia is both a big market, but also a big source of innovation. So if you look at some of the facts, over 50% of the population lives in Asia. 57% of the GDP growth comes from Asia. You have over 50% of the disease burden in Asia. But at the same time, and this is where people, I think, are not aware, a lot of innovation also comes from Asia already. 64% of the world-class patents, 51% of the top tech company revenue growth, and 38% of the global biopharma pipeline is in Asia. So therefore, And this is something that, in our opinion, and my opinion, will even accelerate because there is a catch-up effect in life sciences and healthcare in general happening in Asia because the middle class becoming more affluent, the standards go up. There is a commitment from the governments to focus on healthcare as percentage of GDP. And there is a realization that we need also medicine and cures and therapies for Asians, genotypes and phenotypes. So therefore, I think as Flagship, with our aspiration of being preeminent globally, it's very important to be part of Asia.
Right, and really the recognition of the diversity of the world's population and how we can really contribute and leverage the partnership.
Exactly, and then the second, so why Singapore? And this was, I think, an obvious decision from my perspective, because Singapore has very similar thinking as Flagship has, future back with high aspirations. There is a very systematic approach towards science. There are these 5-year plans and long-term, and there is a long-term commitment towards R&D and also especially in life sciences. And you can say Singapore is a great example of an ecosystem that has been built since 1965. And already Irene, I think all Singaporeans are very modest. So the population is actually 5.7 million and not 5. But that's very typical. Singapore is very modest and a lot of accomplishments in the past. But the whole perspective is future back and looking forward. And therefore, we thought it's compatible in terms of culture between Flagship and Singapore to have Singapore as the hub for us in Asia.
Yeah, and you highlighted the word ecosystem. It really is about bridging the ecosystem that Singapore has built over these years in science and technology and the ecosystem that we've constructed at Flagship and among our companies. Irene, you talked about the opportunity to both innovate and to identify new technologies and bring them forward through commercialization as a value proposition for A-Star, and to look at all the places that across your ecosystem and outside the ecosystem maximize that opportunity. So as you think about A-Star's ambitions in innovation, in commercialization, how does the Flagship collaboration, this partnership, contribute to that, extend that, maximize those ambitions?
So I think what we're really excited about for Flagship, exactly to your point about kindred spirits and similar thinking, we're really excited that Flagship is bringing the Boston ecosystem that you've built to connect with the Singapore ecosystem. And when we think about aspirations for where A-Star wants to be, where Singapore wants to be, I think that connectivity to the global market is so critical. And I see this partnership as enabling us to tap into the richness of the Boston ecosystem, be it the talent, be it the funding, be it the opportunity for the market. And so when we looked at partners to consider working alongside us, I think that natural affinity to Flagship was so obvious, right? Firstly, because Flagship thinks big. You think at the ecosystem global level, and we as Singapore also aspire to do that. And I think because our partnership is so extensive, it's not just about future-back venture building. It's about talent development. And for Singapore, if you look at what we do have, no natural resources. Talent, humans are the only natural resource we do have. And investing in that talent development is so critical for us. Another aspect that we're looking forward to doing more with Flagship is because your portfolio companies are so successful and they're all working on meaningful questions that the world needs answered. And we welcome that to come to Singapore. So when we think about how that partnership is going to advance our ambition as A-Star, as Singapore, I think the fit is very clear.
Yeah, that's great. And Andre, from your perspective, our partnership with A-Star is our first partnership in Singapore. We're delighted to have started going down this road together. Where do you see the opportunity? Where do you see, from the Flagship perspective, based in Singapore, where you see this headed?
Yeah, I think as Irene rightly points out, there is a lot of compatibility in terms of culture, in terms of aspirations, and I would even say in terms of capabilities. A-Star has impressive capabilities, both in the biomedical sciences, but also physical sciences and engineering domains, which is going to be very important going forward since the merging of engineering and life sciences is happening. So there's, I would say, big breadth and depth of expertise. Secondly, I would say the leadership that I've met at A-Star. And we have colleagues here in the room. We have Kayin here, Crystal, Irene, and also last year actually we had Zivi here on the panel. And all of them are great leaders. Yeah. And I would say with high aspirations and with, I would say, I call it with the servant leadership mindset to really, I think, make sure the best happens, I would say, to Singapore, but also Singapore contributes to Asia and to the world. Yeah. And that's very similar, I would say, the way we as at Flagship operate. Yeah. So this was, I think, an obvious choice, if you want. Yeah. And we say it's a marriage in heaven or so. We'll see, but we're hoping that. Yeah.
We hope so too.
Yeah, that's great. You know, I think from my perspective, as I think about, you know, when I see more broadly corporate development at Flagship and the many partnerships that we have, what's unique about A-Star, what's unique about our work in Singapore, you know, first, I do think A-Star is really a unique entity that thinks broadly scientifically across the physical and life sciences, but also, and goes deep wherever needed and where there's opportunity, but also operates in a world of connectivity. And you know, you highlighted how you always look and find the opportunity in technology innovation, but really what's happening is the culture is everyone, there are many institutes that you highlighted, but they don't work in isolation. They work really in combination. So when Flagship comes and shares what it's doing and its company shares what it's doing, everyone at A-Star takes an A-Star mindset, an opportunity mindset across the institutes versus narrowly, which I think is quite special and really is, you know, 1 + 1 = 3 situation when you bring Flagship's companies, A-Star, and what the result may be. You know, the other aspect though that I would highlight is the way in which A-Star has made investments in areas, at least from my perspective, that align very closely with our companies. So, you know, I think one of the most recent institutes, the Nucleic Acid Therapeutics Initiative, is highly synergistic with our nucleic acid companies, nucleic acid therapeutics companies such as Tessera, who's focused on gene writing, or SAIL, which is endless RNA platform, or Alterna, which is tRNA medicines, or even Mirai Bio, that's creating an end-to-end platform for nucleic acid therapeutics. And so there already you see where bridges, even before we start, where bridges could happen, as well as A-Star's AI and drug discovery, that whole entity, which, you know, really focuses on how to bridge AI and drug discovery. I think there's going to be some synergy. And then finally, you know, A-Star's network, A-Star's connectivity network with all the hospitals and a number of KOLs, and even you know, country-level programs like PRECISE, where it's a precision medicine effort. You could imagine in the future it would be an opportunity for us to leverage the modalities that we're creating into a very organized and thoughtful and well-networked you know, program to help drive medicines for the population in Singapore and in the region.
Yeah. You know, Justine, thanks so much for talking about some of these national level initiatives. And I think, again, looking at our what we do at A-Star, although we're an organization of 5,000 people, the reality is that we're the strategic innovation engine for Singapore. And many of these initiatives that you mentioned are partnerships that we have where we do this across the entire ecosystem for Singapore. We're not very big and we're very practical. The reality is that in Singapore can't do everything. So we choose to do some things very, very well. So you talked about PRECISE. And I think what's, again, very special and unique about Singapore is that our government continues to commit and investing in long-term science that allows us to gain insights. And I can share a little bit about PRECISE. So essentially, over the last 7-8 years, what we have done is we have dutifully collected 100,000 healthy volunteers from Singapore. I'm going to ramp that up to close to 1 million, where we'll be genotyping and phenotyping them. And coming back to my point about, you know, Singapore viewing talent or our people as our core resource, we want to understand how choices that we make, be it early in life or mid in life and later in life, really affect us on the life course. And we also recognize that Asians are a little bit different from perhaps what we see in the rest of the world. So having that focus on Asian biology, having that understanding of not just genetically, genomically, phenotypically at a disease level, how we can intervene perhaps earlier, so that, you know, for Singaporeans, it's not about the life, but also the health span. And for us in Singapore, when we invest in research, these large cohort studies enable us to get very, very clear insights that enable us to make the right decisions as a people and as a government. So thanks for raising those.
Right, and I should highlight that the other piece, and I want to get to two elements going on at Flagship. One, bring the Preemptive Health and Medicine Initiative.
That's right.
Where we are trying to understand essentially the stages of pre-disease, and if you could understand that precisely, then you could actually intervene in unique ways. So having partnerships with Singapore, understanding, essentially the longitudinal information around disease progression, you can actually both uncover the biological and biological dynamic shifts that happen in the stages leading up to disease where you have symptoms, as well as trying different interventions, again, that you want to really impact the world, but maybe could uniquely impact the folks regionally as a function of what their early stage disease stages are. The other is we also, separate from the Preemptive Health and Medicine Initiative, we also have our Enabling Technologies Initiative. And we're talking so much about the life sciences and the biomedical, but you highlight, and important to note, on the physical sciences, whether it be material science, robotics, automation, it really maps very well into our work at Flagship in launching the Enabling Technologies Initiative, where we recognize that transformative therapeutic modalities require transformative enabling technologies to be able to effectively reach patients. And that's an area that I know you know well,
yes.
Andre, based on past experience and current activity, that is important to highlight that, again, because A*STAR spans the physical and life sciences, and because there's been such investment deeply in some of these areas, there's kind of quick opportunities to leverage and to bridge our companies, our initiatives with what's happening at A*STAR.
I fully agree, and I think that's also part of the ecosystem that Singapore has built, which is strengths in semiconductors, in MEMS. There is this advanced remanufacturing tech center, which is really showcasing what is possible in robotics, in automation across a diverse field of industries. And lastly, I would say Singapore is quite advanced in terms of digital thinking, be it the patient records, but also having STEM students or STEM talents, like 220,000 of those 5.7 million, I would say, which is quite a big number. And that's also why 4,200 tech companies have Singapore as their regional hub, because of that, in a sense. And lastly, I would say the compute landscape and the data center landscape. So 50% of the data center capacity in Southeast Asia is in Singapore. And that basically allows to process the data that comes out of Precise in a great way. And lastly, also in AgTech, I think A*STAR has also activities, and we are hoping to collaborate with the Institute of Food and Biotech Innovation for food security
and resilience.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's another node, which is terrific. So I want to go back. I want to pull on the thread that you highlighted around the number of companies that are based that have their hub and they're based in Singapore. We get asked often, will Flagship be originating new companies in Singapore? So, Andre, I would love for you to comment on how Flagship's thinking about, really helping catalyze the biotech ecosystem in Singapore, and where we see the opportunity now and in the future.
Yeah. So first of all, as you know, out of the 110 companies that Flagship has created since its inception, with the exception of one, all have been Cambridge-based, and one has a dual headquarter at the moment. We are hoping that eventually in the long term, we can also create companies in Singapore. And that's our aspiration. At the same time, we have a very unique approach, a novel approach how we collaborate, because usually I think the common thinking is you crawl, you walk, and then you run. But we actually bring already, I think with our approach, the running through specific projects through Singapore, with pre-translated projects that can then be scientifically developed in Singapore, and they can then become part of a company that we form, and over time these projects can become an entire company. So that's an approach that allows immediate entrepreneuring and immediate, I would say, translation of the Flagship expertise, combining it with the Singaporean expertise. And the second thing is we want to connect the ecosystem of Flagship. And Flagship, as you know, has over 9,000 employees in our ecosystem. We have these 110 companies that we have created. We have actually right now over 40 companies in creation in parallel. And I think we have accomplished a good ecosystem as Flagship. And through A-Star, we want to connect that with the Singapore ecosystem, and then have, if you want, the best of best, and apply that to a region, in this case, the ecosystem, and hopefully accelerate and expand further the ecosystem in Singapore.
Yeah, we're looking forward to that. And I think, you know, the aspiration for Singapore is that we will have foundational building blocks for many companies to come and benefit from interacting and innovating with us. And we want to build globally successful, globally relevant businesses from Singapore for the world. So I'm really excited, you know, that we have this opportunity to do that together with Flagship.
Yeah, and you know, and just one thing to add, all of my experience, both Flagship and preceding that, spending time in Singapore, is the orientation towards collaboration, orientation towards partnership, and I think that is also future back, right? A future back is imagining a future, a long-lasting, trusted relationship, and kind of working backwards on what do you need to do in these early phases, and that's been my experience consistently, and that consistency and that orientation, really comes out, I think, on the other side ultimately. So I want to circle back on the topic of talent development because I think it's an area that is a real shared commitment. At Flagship, we focus on recruiting top talent, creating an environment that allows them to pioneer new science, to entrepreneur and company creation, and to learn how to scale those companies. And would love to hear more about what A-Star is doing more generally in talent development, because you touched on it, and I think is a really unique aspect of the Singapore community and environment that we could both learn from and connect to, I think, in complementary ways.
Yes, thanks, Justine. I think, so for A-Star, we look at talent development at several levels, and I'll start with the scholarships that we provide. For Singapore, the Singaporean community has opportunities to study all over the world. And so the A-Star Scholarship provides undergraduate, graduate, as well as postgraduate training in all the top universities. So if you name a brand name university, we probably have students in them. And I think the way that we view this is less about the branding, but more about that connectivity of these students as they go to these top communities and bring them back to Singapore, right? So I think at any one time, we have close to about 1,200 scholars in flight. And for us, when they come back to Singapore, is the opportunity to bring the learnings and the connections they've had in these very vital communities back to Singapore. So that's the scholarships. But I think beyond that, talking about entrepreneurship, we realize that there really is a lot of innate talent within the Singaporeans to be entrepreneurial. If you look at, again, our roots, entrepreneur trade, actually we came from a background of trading. And so that's within us. But when we look at the academic community or the scientists that we have, sometimes entrepreneurship doesn't come as naturally to them. But I feel that it's about learning the right tools and being in the right environment. And that's why partnering with Flagship, be it being part of your portfolio companies, spending some time in summer programs at Flagship, I think opens their eyes to what's possible about their science. And when you talk about what we do at A-Star, for us, our scientists are the people that we take care the most of. And for us, it's giving them that exposure to possibilities. Right, so when you look at a good piece of science, we want them to connect to the so what, who cares question of what do I do now? So we run several programs to help them think about how does this piece of work connect to real needs and problems in the world. So we run those programs quite consistently throughout the year. And then interestingly, in the last 3 years or so, that focus on founders. They're such a special breed, and these are people that are willing to take their life's work and perhaps put it into a company. And we realize that, startups are hard to do. How do we make sure they stay resilient? How do they continue to innovate whilst the world might be telling them no? And so several of our new programs now at A-Star are around building that resilience and grit